Yes, sir.
Who wrote The Prince?
Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli, 1412.
About the art of war.
Art of War, Sun Tzu, S-U-N-T-Z-U. 500 years BC. Best military strategy ever written. Marvelous book. Everybody that goes into the CIA has to read that book before they take their first class. It's a primer. Because he's the father of military intelligence. He says if you know your strength and you know your troops, you will win 50% of your battles. He says if you know your strength and your troops and you know the enemy's strength and his troops, you will win 100% of your battles. Fascinating stuff. I mean, really, you can't beat it. When the enemy is bigger and more powerful than you are, the best strategy is invisibility. Don't be seen. It's not as hard as it sounds. Don't file a return. Now, if you got a job, okay. And the guy's got another program, this untaxed thing, that's not what we're doing. We got a sort of a moderation of that, or I should say a modification of that, okay? And, you know, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. If you don't like one program, you might like the other. You know, it's a free country. We don't have a monopoly on anything. Okay, you may even like somebody else's plan. You know, just all we're doing is giving you the necessary information so that my grandkids don't live in slavery. That's why I'm here. Okay. And the only thing that's going to protect them is you. Okay, because if you live in slavery, then it's going to be harder for them to get out of it. Okay, and we don't want to pass the system on to them, do we? Okay, entries. Okay, as far as your time is concerned, okay, you want to put down the name of the person that you're with, the relationship that that person has to your business, and the reason why you had that meeting. Sales, promotion, you know, consulting, whatever. And we'll go through this and we'll explain. As a matter of fact, we'll even give you a 3-month supply of record-keeping materials absolutely free when we see you and show you how to do all this. No cost. If you don't want to come in, don't come in. You can keep the records anyway. Okay, as far as the entries now over here are concerned, you want to put down the date that the money was spent, the amount of money that was spent, who the money was paid to, the category that it was paid in, and the receipt. You always want to get a receipt, no matter what. The receipt is the thing that proves that you had the expense. Okay? So you may even, well, I found that if you go out to the shopping centers at night, there's usually some laying out there, okay? And you can, and what this does is that it improves the ecology. It actually helps the place if you pick these up, okay? And if you have a difficulty with this, we even have a client in Burbank who has a multi-level receipt business. So, you know, not to worry, okay? So, I mean, this isn't like really serious stuff. Oh, goodness, it's hard to do a serious tax seminar. But I mean, hey, you know, the point is, if you spend all your money, just keep the receipt. Okay? If nothing can be disallowed, you've got the receipt for it, don't you? Okay, that's the time and the money. Okay, the next question would be, let's see how much time have we got here. Let me just go through quickly then. I think probably some aspects of law which you might enjoy. What we want to show is, did you remember we said that there was the law? Okay, so we have what's called, we'll call this common law, because common law is the law that's made by common people, whereas a law that's made by an emperor is imperial law. That's the definition of it, okay? So under common law, we have a very interesting thing that takes place in this country. Under common law, okay, you have a series of things that take place, I should point out. You've got the law that's actually made by the legislative branch of our government and signed by the president, don't you? The executive branch of our government. Okay, and I guess I really don't need that top line to go clear across there. I'll make it like this. Okay, now you have, after a law is made, it's made into what we call a code. There's military codes, insurance codes, tax codes, all this. That's done by legislative analysts within the legislature, okay? And then, if you don't like this, you can go to court. And you can maybe have a judge hear it in a judicial case, or you may even want to request a jury. So you can get a jury trial. Okay, so this is the way our law works. This is set up by the Constitution, because that's, you know, it's what we learn 8th grade civics class. That's what we learned, right? Common law. The problem is only 5% of the people when it comes to taxes are ever participate in this. The reason is that it costs you somewhere around $250,000 to complete this process. Okay? And so not that many people want to spend that kind of money on their taxes. If you're talking about actually going to a civil case, getting a jury trial, so forth and so on, you're talking mega bucks. Okay. So what people do is that they opt for what we call imperial law. Okay, and imperial law over here has an interesting thing. They have what's called a interpretation. Remember that? Remember we had two things, the law and the interpretation of the law. Remember we had two things, money and a note. The old America had money, the new America has notes. The old America had law, the new America has interpretations. See, think, two Americas, okay? Now, what do we have here? We have a regulation. The new law is a regulation. The interpretation, I'm sorry, is a regulation. And if you don't like the regulation, you can have a hearing. That's called an audit or an appeal. It certainly sounds fair, doesn't it? Okay, until we look at it a little more closely. And we find, if we look at it closely, that, for example, the interpretation was made by IRS. And then we take a look at the regulation, and we see that the regulation was written by IRS. And then we go to the hearing, and we find, oh, the hearing is conducted by IRS. And this is a surprise now. The next part you won't expect at all. The IRS usually decides that its interpretation was correct. And what do they say in the cartoons? That's all, folks. The only way you can change that is to go here. You got an extra $250,000 just kicking around? No problem. Or you can go to a little court that they design here called tax court, which is really supposedly a legislative court, which is not a judicial court either. There's no jury. Remember King Charles got his head cut off? No jury. Star Chamber Court, that's what tax court is. Okay, not too problems. See, these problems have all been solved. And when you take history, you realize they've been solved. That's why you can't have the history. Oh, boy. All right, so what happens here? Well, you go down here to your tax preparer or whatever it is, and he doesn't tell you all this, does he? Isn't that interesting? And because what? He has 4 problems. He's got 4 big problems down here, this tax preparer, doesn't he? Number 1, he has to be trained, and he's trained by the IRS toady H.R. Block. And then he has to be okayed. He has to be able to do these taxes. So he has to, in the state of California, he has to be what they call licensed, or has to have a number. Okay, and that can be revoked so that he can't do them anymore. And then his review is he's audited by these guys, maybe, you see, or whatever. And not only that, but he gets all the information from these guys and so forth. I mean, there's just a lot of things here. Okay, and he can be put out of business anytime the IRS wants to put him out of business. They just audit all of his clients. That's simple. You don't go back to that guy next year, do you? Solves that problem. And they can put these guys out of business anytime they want. This guy has his, this is George Orwell with the guy's face with the hobnail boot right on top of it. Okay? And this guy now, he does the thing he's supposed to do. He collects money for his master. Because his master is the one that decides whether he can do this next year. You don't decide that. IRS does. And if he doesn't collect enough, he's got some problems. So he wants to make sure he collects a lot. Besides, he doesn't have much time to help you anyway. He's too busy, right? Okay? See, in the old days, in Jesus' time, they had people who were tax collectors, and they called them publicans. And they were considered hated. They were considered traitors by their fellow neighbors, you remember? And because they would take money from their neighbors and give it to the enemy, the hated occupying Roman army. And of course, today these people are called Republicans. Anyway, so as we go along, we find that, okay, if we're waiting for someone else to solve this problem, we'll wait a long time, won't we? Because nobody's going to solve this problem for you. But you can solve it for yourself. Got it? The control is inside. I hope, against hope, that if there's anything you remember tonight, that you're in control. Because with the information, you're in control. The IRS is second fiddle compared to your power. This is important to remember, okay? Now, so what you're doing now is that you have to maybe take this guy to court. Now, there was a case like this up in Morgan Hill, California, a few years ago. There was a dentist that for years and years and years had a business that lost money. So the IRS came and visited him. Could you tell us something about this business? He said, yes, I'd be glad to. He says, come and I'll even show it to you. So he went out behind the house into a barn, and he said, see this horse? And they said, yeah. He said, that's my business. And they said, that's your business? And he said, yeah. He says, actually, it was a terrible thing happened. He said, 14 years ago, I bought 2 horses, and I was going to raise and breed horses. But he said, a terrible thing happened. He said, the first year, my stud died. And he said, I had all this money wrapped up in this big breeding horse, and he died. And so meanwhile, I've got this mare on my hands. I'm trying to save enough money to buy another breeder, and I just, I haven't got it yet. So meanwhile, I'm writing off all of the food, shelter, land, and everything for this horse. And they said, well, we have this little regulation that says if you don't make a profit in 3 out of 5 years, then that's a hobby. And he said, gentlemen, he says, I don't understand. This couldn't possibly be a hobby. And they said, why not? And he said, because I hate horses. And so they said, well, no, we're not going to buy that one. And so they disallowed his horses as a hobby. Well, he ends up taking it to the Supreme Court in 1981. Okay, he took it to the Supreme Court. It appears in the front page of the Wall Street Journal finally because he'd already gone to IRS audits, 3 of them. He'd already gone through tax court. He'd already gone to federal district court. He'd already gone to courts of appeals. See? This guy kept losing. See? And finally he gets up to the Supreme Court. Then the Supreme Court said, well, it would not be reasonable to assume that a man for 14 years would get up every morning and shovel manure for a hobby. And so since there was some work involved, therefore it wasn't a hobby, it was a business. And whether he made any money or not is incidental because they went by the law. Notice they didn't go by the interpretation. See, the Supreme Court doesn't sit there and cogitate over the interpretation. As far as they're concerned, that doesn't exist. Because it really doesn't. It only exists in your mind. It's a mind trip. It's psychological warfare. That interpretation really isn't there. See, isn't this fun? Okay, now, because you're going to go here. Now, and so they asked, so the Wall Street Journal, they interviewed this guy, says, God, how come you spent $250,000 on this horse? He said, well, he said, I wouldn't have done it except I'd written off $650,000 on expenses. Well, all right. You see, so it was profitable to him. But you see, that was an article you could put in the paper because that was a safe article. Because Joe Lunchbucket isn't going to go down and do this. So they could print it, you see. If Joe was going to do it, then that doesn't show up. So it was kind of everybody in Wall Street had a good chuckle. The guys in the bank had a chuckle. The guys in the IRS probably had a good chuckle. Because he's the only guy doing it. But, see, you can do it too. Okay, now, 95% of the people down here, okay, are following this system, and it isn't even a law. It's just that they're conned into it. This is America 2. This is America 1. Get the picture? There's different people. There's different businesses. There's different laws. There's different forms. It's a different world. It's a different country. Which one do you want to work in? See? Now, so what we have now is a situation that would take you, just like a corporation, all the way through this. We got our ideas because we do the same thing for you that a tax department does for a corporation. Okay? Let me show you how this works. We work with different companies, different places, different times. We don't just work with one thing. I'm just a tax consultant. I just consult with you, and I can refer you here, and I can refer you there, if you really want to do these things, okay? But what you're getting with me is just simply the consulting, the information that will empower you to do this. But you still have to do it. I can't do anything if you don't. If you don't have the records, we can't win the audit. Or, come out with what we call a check back audit. We don't just like to do audits, we like to get a check back. In other words, whatever tax you paid in prior years, we get that back. We like to be very expensive when we go through to IRS. Okay, now,